This is not a story about a battle you'll find in history textbooks. It's not about generals whose names are preserved in archives. This is a story about a signal, short, unfinished, that according to available information, triggered a chain of events felt far beyond the place where it was sent. And the most unusual part, that signal was never completed. Autumn of 1943 was a period of intense but poorly documented activity across Southeast Europe. While large offensives were taking place on well-known fronts, another kind of war was unfolding beneath the surface. A war of information, a war of patience, a war of silence. During this time, Allied forces increasingly relied on local sources. People without uniforms, without ranks, without formal military training. Their value wasn't in force, but in position, and in their ability to observe daily life without drawing attention. One such point was located in an area considered strategically insignificant. No industry, no major roads, no reason for prolonged focus on military maps. Precisely because of that, it was the perfect place for activities that needed to remain unseen. In that area stood a small village by a river with only a few dozen houses. Throughout the war, it wasn't known for battles or destruction. It didn't appear in official military reports. And for that reason, it remained largely ignored by historians for decades. But local accounts tell a different story. Years later, older residents repeated the same detail. At night, there was only one light that occasionally appeared in the village. It didn't come from a home. It didn't come from a barn. It came from the old school building. During the day, the school functioned as best it could. Classes were irregular, lessons shortened. Children attended when circumstances allowed, but the building still served its purpose. At night, however, the doors stayed locked, the windows darkened, and the light appeared only briefly, without any consistent pattern. At that time, radio transmissions were among the most dangerous activities in occupied territory. Even short signals could be detected, not always immediately, not always precisely, but often enough for suspicion to arise. And once suspicion existed, monitoring followed. According to fragments of information later pieced together, that school was part of an extremely thin communication network, not constant, not centralized, but adapted to terrain and circumstance. A network that depended on discipline, restraint, and perfect timing. At the center of that point was one man. In official documents, his name appears only once. No background, no photograph, no biography, just a profession, school teacher, no military record, no personal file, no trace before or after the war. According to indirect sources, he was responsible for maintaining radio contact. Not daily, not on a schedule, only when information was judged important enough to justify the risk. The decision was his. No consultation, no guarantees, no option to reverse course once the signal began, because every transmission carried consequences. Then came the night that later became a moment of silence. That evening, according to local recollections, the light in the school remained on slightly longer than usual. The signal began normally, short pulses, pauses, repetition, and then it stopped. No closing sequence, no confirmation of receipt, no formal end to the transmission. In the terminology of the time, this did not indicate a technical malfunction. It meant one thing: the connection was abruptly interrupted. The next morning, the school did not open. Children arrived, but the doors remained locked. Local records contain only a brief note: classes temporarily suspended. So when they offer you a drink, let it sit, because your DNA never forgets. The teacher's name no longer appeared. What's notable is what didn't happen. There are no reports of public incidents, no recorded arrests, no documented clashes. But residents noticed something else. In the days that followed, patrols appeared more frequently on the surrounding roads, briefly, without stopping, as if checking, not searching. Then several weeks later, a development cast new light on the entire situation. According to Allied documents declassified years later, a logistical site in the region ceased operations. The reason was not specified, only a short note. Information received earlier. The coordinates of that location closely matched those previously transmitted from the area near the village. Was the incomplete message enough? Had the signal already conveyed the critical pattern? Or was it simply the final step in a process that had been unfolding for months? There are no official answers. After the war, the village returned to ordinary life. There were no acknowledgments, no investigations, no plaques, only a single tree planted where the old school once stood. No marker, no explanation. The elders said it was planted so the place wouldn't remain empty. Decades later, the village appeared again. As a footnote in a report, it referenced a lost transmission and included a phrase that stood out from standard military language. Message likely received. That sentence changes everything, because it suggests the signal wasn't a failure. It may have been a conclusion. If the signal was a conclusion, then the question becomes, a conclusion to what? Later analysis of wartime radio networks shows that information coming from that region was not one-time intelligence. It described patterns, habits, routines, repeated movements. That kind of information doesn't need constant transmission. It only needs to be sent once, at the right moment. If that moment was that night, then the interruption made sense. The network was no longer needed. That would also explain why patrol interest faded so quickly. The information had already served its purpose. But one question remains unanswered. What happened to the teacher? His name does not appear on any list. Not as a casualty, not as a prisoner, not as a collaborator. It's as if he was deliberately removed from the record. In history, such cases are rare, but they exist. Sometimes people positioned at the intersection of sensitive information simply disappear from context. Not because they were forgotten, but because their mention was no longer required. Not as punishment, not as recognition, but as silence. And perhaps that is the true point of this story. History is not always shaped by events everyone sees. Sometimes it shifts quietly, in short messages, in decisions that last only seconds. The signal that was never finished may not have been a mistake. It may have been the most precise ending possible, because at the moment it was sent, its purpose had already been fulfilled. And everything that followed, the silence, was simply confirmation.